Well, hey everybody. Welcome back to another episode of What I Think the Bible Means. My name's Tom, and today I'll be discussing what I think the Bible means. Today's episode is going to be Cain and Abel. Story of Cain and Abel. That's, I'd say, pretty relatable. Anyone who's had family struggles, or if the family has people that fight, and maybe they fight more than families should, can relate to kind of this story here. So let's kind of talk about it. I'm going to start by reading the words of the text, and I will put that up on the screen so people who want to can follow along. That's the wrong one. It's coming. Here we go. NIV Bible. There it is. All right. So this is Genesis chapter 4, and I'm not going to be going through every chapter of Genesis. I'm going to be skipping around, but some of the early stories, they just kind of run together, and I'm going to be touching a lot of the ones that are most well known. So this is the text I'm going to be analyzing today. Genesis chapter 4, Cain and Abel. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought forth some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of his firstborn flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where's your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you're under a curse, and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain made love to his wife. She became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, Irad father of Mahul, Mahul the father of Methuselah. We'll get back to him later. Methuselah the father of Lamech, and so on and so on. And I'm just going to skip to the part here where, because none of this is going to be part of my analysis. Picking up at verse 23. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, "Listen to me, wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son named Seth, saying, "God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him." Seth also had a son, and he named him Enosh. At the time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. So that's the story of Cain and Abel, and I'm just going to kind of go over first the nuts and bolts of what I think the story means. And then, like previous episodes, I'm going to go back to the beginning of the story and kind of break that apart into how I feel our consciousness understands the world and what the Bible is trying to help us do when it comes to understanding what is it that makes us get in our own way. What can we do when we face a struggle that is so complicated we don't even understand how we're the cause of it? That is kind of the roadmap I've seen, and throughout the entire Bible, and I'll be pointing them out in this story, how Cain and Abel are very good examples of this, as are Adam and Eve. Really, there's not very much here that isn't just an excellent psychological picture of who we are at any point in our development. You can go to the Bible and find a parallel. So, moving on. Adam made love to his wife Eve. She became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. So Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain liked to work the soil. Abel was a herdsman. And so they were just kind of doing their things. And Cain and Abel said, or learned from their mom and dad, hey, here's how you sacrifice to the Lord. And Cain made his offerings, and Abel made his offerings, and God didn't like Cain's offering, and God did like Abel's offering, and that made Cain angry. Cain took his brother out in the field, and he killed him. And then God said, that's not very good. You've done the worst thing possible. And because of that, your punishment will be very severe. You're going to be banished. And nothing you do is going to bear fruit. And that's kind of, it's like a curse. So he's going to wander. And you can see all of this summed up here. The reason behind Cain, the core of the Cain story is, how should I know, am I my brother's keeper? That's I just want to be left alone, right? That's don't bother me and I won't bother you, even if you're bothering somebody else. That's the am I my brother's keeper that creeps in. And I'll talk about how that ties in. So that's the basic story of it. But what does all that mean, right? Well, here's what I think it means. We'll get back to the title of the show, roll credits. So I believe the Bible is a roadmap for consciousness. And so I've explained how that's set up. So if that's new to you, you'll have to go back and get caught up, because I'm going to be building on it. I can't build it every time. So Adam made love to his wife Eve. Well, we've already talked about how Adam and Eve are the symbols for God in terms of potential. They are the shot callers, and that is going to transition pretty much as we go through the Bible. But Adam and Eve are the split parts of ourselves, the masculine and the feminine, and the logic and the emotion, the chaos and the order. And that's why the first sentence is so important and really so brilliant. Adam made love to his wife Eve. That's what happens when emotion and logic agree. That is the merging of order and chaos. That is the alignment, the transfiguration, like a magic trick, where a thing that makes you feel a certain way that you can't understand why it makes you feel a certain way also then makes sense in a very logically and clearly thought out manner. When those two things love each other, not when they agree with each other. Adam made love to his wife. Adam didn't beat his wife. Adam didn't turn his wife into him. So this is a union of those two things. It's not a competition. It's a cooperation. So people can see that when it becomes a competition, then one person has to lose. When it's a cooperative, well, then you don't get to pick winners and losers. That's what I think that means. If you pick winners and losers, nothing happens. Adam made love to his wife Eve. She became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. And she said, with the help of the Lord, I brought forth a man. So logic and emotion, order and chaos got together, and they had a new thought. And it's like a child. And if you think about consciousness, one of the things that makes consciousness behave like it's a living thing is, number one, it tries to grow and evolve and change over time. As you learn things, you become more capable of expressing yourself in the world. That's consciousness. And one of the properties of a thing that is alive is reproduction. So if your consciousness is you and you are alive, then it makes sense that the thing that is you would also try to reproduce itself. And we cover that in Genesis, how trees bear fruit. So this is the same analogy being carried over, except it's different now, because all of the plants and animals and trees, that was everything given to us by nature, right? That was everything given to us by God. Like that's our starting pack, right? But now that we have that to live in, and we've already got kicked out of the garden, so there's that. You have the two shot callers, the male and the female, and they work together and they say, okay, we've decided this is our first child, our firstborn, our first idea. The first thing we learn by interacting with the world around us. That is Cain. And Cain isn't dumb. Cain isn't a fully evil man. Cain is a person who is a farmer. And I want to talk about farmers for a second, because it takes a lot to be a successful farmer. You can't just go out and throw seeds and expect things to grow. You'll get lucky, but you're not going to survive, and you're not going to produce enough that you can live on without some serious planning, some serious work, education, long days of physical labor. So Cain worked hard, and he had to figure out a lot of things on his own because he was the firstborn. And Adam and Eve, they didn't have any experience growing up as a baby. Think about that. They begin fully realized. So that whole part of their childhood that Cain is now experiencing, Adam and Eve don't know what that means. And Cain doesn't know what that means because he's a new person. So Cain is doing the best he can out there. But let's talk about what happens next. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. And Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. So Cain went out and got it done every day. Abel kept flocks. Let's talk about that. That's the difference between competence and cooperation. So there's two paths to success in the world. And these are measurable things, like psychology. People have measured this and verified that on your own, or disagree with it without verifying it, or agree with it without verifying it. I guess you could take my word for it. But they are competence and cooperation. So individual competence and the ability to cooperate with other people. And what you have there is a person who is good at working hard and getting a result. And Abel is very good at keeping a group of chaotic things from running away and getting destroyed. Which makes sense, right? That Adam and Eve would have those two sons. Now, if those two sons loved each other, Cain could teach his brother Abel how to work his flock just as hard as he works the soil. And Abel could teach Cain that it's not just about the work. If your work doesn't produce anything that brings you happiness, or it doesn't do any good for anyone but yourself, then you'll be leading a life of isolation and resentment. And so Abel would be the one to give that. So in this example, we now have the condensed versions of emotion and logic here. So Abel now becomes the emotion, and Cain begins the logic. So in the course of time, Cain brought some fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of his firstborn flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain, his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your doors and desires to have you. You must rule over it." Okay, so let's talk about the offerings. And let's think about this. When you work the soil, you get in what you put out and you're limited to what you can do. Okay. And it's all on you, right? It's all on you to make it happen. So that's where you find the person who begins to look at life as a series of transactions, right? Like there's some balance sheet because they're the logical hard worker and they realize that if I do this, then that happens. And you can trust that if I do this, then that happens. But if you trust that causality so much that all the other paths become invalid, or worse, offensive, well, that's where it becomes self-destructive. And I'm not letting, so pretty much what happens is the person who is logical finds very logical reasons to get very resentful of the people who are not seeing the world the same way that they do. And they're so smart that they can figure out the best ways to work really hard at to convince themselves that they need to be resentful of this. It's a self-feeding mechanism that is born in logic. Logic is the denial of chaos. Logic is the antithesis of emotion. Oftentimes people say you need to separate your argument from your emotion, and that's true, but you can't finish your argument until you reunite your logic with the proper emotion to give it some sort of relevance. So yes, and not yes, no. That's what we see here in Cain and Abel is yes, no. And Abel brought forth an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. And the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering. So Abel's offering, right? We never told like very much about it. And we don't learn very little about what Cain actually offered. He could have brought forth like a fair, logical, and rational harvest, right? Like he could have done the math and been like, okay, I did this, I did this, I did this. I lost these crops. Okay, now God gets this percentage and I'm done. I did it. I fulfilled my expected obligation. That's what we could say of Cain. Because look, Cain later goes on to run a city. He gets married and runs a city. So he can't be dumb. And he can't really be prone to, well, he is prone to fits of jealous brotherly rage, I guess. But that doesn't make him stupid. It makes him a bad judge of what he should do. So my interpretation of this is a warning against the overly logical breakdown of everything that should be, if only. Because the words should be are beautiful and wonderful when used correctly. The words if only can be a sharpening razor's edge of exactly where a problem needs to be attacked when it's done properly. But when it's done improperly, the words if only, they become the perfect setup for who is your biggest enemy. If only this group of people would stop doing this. If only that group of people wasn't such a bunch of crybabies. If only I didn't have to be responsible for this and this and this. And let's assume that the person saying those things has a good argument to make. Well, so you do, okay? Nobody's going to take that away. A good argument doesn't go away. How effective you are while making that good argument at solving your problem, well, that's a different matter entirely. And sometimes those two things, you got to pick one over the other. That's what we see with Cain. Cain gives what is fair, and he decides what is fair. Okay, so let's set that aside for a minute. That's the logical. I'm not letting Abel off the hook here because he got murdered, okay? I'm going to be a little more sympathetic because he got murdered by his brother, who he trusted enough, by the way, who he said, let's go in a field. And he just said, okay, could you carry this giant rock for me as well? and then turn around and close your eyes and count to 10. So we see Abel. He brought forth an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering. Okay, so let's talk about that. Abel's offering was his very best, his most sincere, his most enthusiastic. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering. So the offering in this verse is representative of the thing that we give of ourselves, right? That's the offering. And we decide what the offering is. Nowhere does it say, and God commanded blank to offer this many this and this many that and this many that as an offering for thankfulness. There were some offerings that had rules like that, and that's a different matter entirely. That's the laws of cause and effect, meaning if you do this, this will happen, and here is the price. But some of these offerings are ones where a person gets to pay into the future. You put a thankfulness, a goodwill offering. It's all up to the person. The person gives it the worth by knowing what to put in and really making an effort. So here, Abel is described as sincere. Okay? This person, Abel, is the person who is completely honest with their emotions all the time. And this person may not have full control over that, right? They may be just emotionally wound. And in this specific example, I'm not picking on any one person because I don't have to, because both of these emotion and logic things live inside all of us. So if I just strip away the emotional side of us and examine that is Abel. The emotional side always tries to do the right thing. The emotional side is a very poor judge of what the right thing is. Incredibly poor. That is, it can make itself incredibly poor, because once the decision is made about a thing, the logic part turns off and the emotion part takes over. So if that decision is made 5 or 6 words into learning about a thing, well, you're going to be enthusiastic and supportive, and your decision is there, and you already thought about it. The emotions are very strong and they're genuine. And so Abel's like, yeah, you got my best. You know what? No, I'm not going to budge. I'm very sincere about this. And that's Abel. So the sincerity, the offering, the desire to give of the self, that is what comes from emotion. The desire to go out and improve, right? To make your life better. That's the offering. And it's pleasing to the Lord. All right? So this is a clue for the things we need to have a strong, healthy consciousness, because things that are pleasing to the Lord are things that are good for our consciousness. That's the parallel in the Bible. That's intentional. And we see this in this instance where the Lord looked on favor with Abel and his offering, in the sense that our emotional side is not a thing that is intrinsically at war with doing the right thing. And when we follow our feelings, when those feelings are not backed by the defense mechanisms of the fight or flight instinct, that is when we are our best. And so that type of offering is pleasing to the Lord, which means those are the things that you do to make your consciousness help you get out of your own way. And that's a different transformation for everybody. But it's a transformation so many people have found that they keep coming back to these stories. So there's that. So it was pleasing to the Lord, but it wasn't pleasing to Cain. Right? And this goes back to the promise made. He said, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. You will strike his head and he will strike your heel. So this representation of logic and emotion is carried over into this chapter with the logic has not accepted emotion. And Cain kills Abel, which means Abel has the right idea. Cain is the brains of the operation, and he is so offended that his approach doesn't work. And Cain looks at his brother, and his brother has not learned how to communicate with Cain in such a way that Cain can understand him. So that's what happens when these ideas happen. You have ideas that have good intentions behind them. That's Abel. Those good intentions might not know how to communicate with the Cains of the world, or even the Cain in your own brain, which is the logic part. And so Cain says, no, this thing is terrible. I've been here longer than you, because Cain is the firstborn. I know what it takes. And you are not fit to live in my universe because you're not strong enough, or you're not good enough, and I'm going to wipe you out. So that's what happens inside us when logic becomes resentful. It begins to kill things. It kills potential. It kills possibility. Right? Everything that Abel could have been. And then I'm going to jump down to the end, because this is where that is tied in. Back where I picked up. Cain, who forged all kinds of tools of bronze and iron. Lamech said to his wife, listen to me, hear my words. I've killed a man for wounding me, and a young man for injuring me. Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. So what you've got there is the fact that when logic and emotion are at war with each other, it becomes impossible to see that new things are only created when logic and emotion agree with each other. And so when one separates the logic and emotion, which we all do, because that's our nature, order and chaos, logic and emotion, feelings and facts. When those two things are viewed as a separate set of competing systems, you have winners and losers. And when the condition for victory is the successful cooperation of logic and emotion, then creating new consciousness where 50% of the required ingredients can't succeed means that individual's consciousness can't succeed. Then that person is Cain. That's what it means. That's what the curse means. Look at what the curse says. This is why I think this. And first of all, look at God scolds him. He says, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? I don't think he's being playful there. That sounds like a, what did you expect would happen? You're logical, right? What did you think was going to happen when you attacked this other person or this other part of you? What did you expect? And then, why is your face downcast? If you do what's right, will you not be accepted? If you don't do what's right, sin is crouching at the door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. This is one of those phrases that has a couple of layers to it. The most simple one is, if you do the right thing, people more or less seem to do pretty good with that. You could look on television and find a few examples every day of how somebody tried to do the right thing, and or somebody wasn't even trying to do anything. They got walloped for it. Some kind of disaster or violence or who knows what. But how many times have you done the right thing for somebody and it hasn't been a disaster? How many times do you remember? Do you remember any of those good ones? There's probably a lot of them. If you're a good person, there should be a lot of them, right? Like, did you volunteer for a thing? Did you listen to somebody when they were having a hard time? Were you a good friend or a good son or a good parent? I don't know. But if you're listening to this, you probably care about being a good person enough to hear what other people think it means when religion tells us how that can help our lives. So I'm assuming, I make certain assumptions about my audience, that they try to be good people and do the right thing. So think about how many times that works out versus how many times it doesn't. And even if you're not trying to win or get ahead, doing the right thing usually seems to end pretty well. Most of the time. Enough that the people who chase it seem to have more success than they can handle, because they're the ones now who get to decide what it means to be successful. right? Think about that. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? He's telling him, Cain, you decided what was right when you chose your action. And if you did the right thing, wouldn't you be accepted? That's fair. That's logical. But if you don't, then sin's trying to get you and you must rule over it. So this is where the amygdala comes in, right? The amygdala is like, they call it the lizard brain. It's our threat detection. It's the fight or flight thing. It's the fastest part of our nervous system. It's very deeply rooted with our body's senses, way more than we are. It has a deeper connection with the subconscious mind than we do, and the subconscious mind communicates with the amygdala directly. The subconscious mind can give the amygdala marching orders to such a degree that it can limit our senses intentionally to make us avoid things it thinks are threatening, or to make us interested in things it feels are promising. That's the cooperation right there. That's why the regular consciousness is kind of at the mercy of the subconscious, is because it's a double team, right? You've got two different consciousnesses, both of them operating in ways that are very difficult to understand because the languages are different, cooperating against you, and working like these tag team combos that, wow, that is the most interesting thing I've ever seen, and you're flooded with endorphins. Well, what do you do with that? Like, you go figure out what it is, or you don't even question it. So that's what that is. But that desire can get warped. And the only way it gets warped goes back to what sin is. And sin is the knowledge of good and evil, and that's making a bad decision about what's good and what's evil. So he says, Cain, your logic was bad, and you killed your brother, which means now he's ruined the potential of all emotion and the ability to gather others. That was Abel's talent, not Cain's. So the emotion is what attracts others to us. The logic is what sustains us. So now it says, here he killed his brother. The Lord says, where's your brother? I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Well, that right there is the us versus them mentality. And us versus them is great when you've got like a football game. But us versus them is a very bad idea when you've got a logical part of your brain and an emotional part of your brain that are sharing the same body, that would like it very much if the body they were living in was successful and it was comfortable and didn't have to worry about survival. So that's kind of where it goes. But you must rule over it. That's the key. So the amygdala is going to come and tell you, hey, it's right to pick sides. I saw what happened to Abel. He was weak. I killed him. He wasn't properly respectful of me. He didn't recognize that I was different from him. I should have been the one to get ahead, not him, because I'm doing all the right things. And logic is a bitch when it tells you you're doing all the right things, because that's not logic, that's religion. With you is God. That's Cain. So he says, am I my brother's keeper? And he goes, look at what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out from the ground. If logic kills your emotion, you can't have new ideas. And if emotion kills your logic, you can't stay sane long enough to have any idea that can't be replaced by some feeling from the body. The logic is what helps us understand our bodies well enough so that we don't, explode every time a refrigerator magnet falls off. There's an appropriate level of response to that. And that appropriate level of response is different when, say, someone skins their knee at a baseball game. And that level of response is different when somebody disagrees with you. And the appropriate response changes when somebody maybe is actually a danger to themselves or others immediately in your presence. It's a scale. And we decide what actions happen at which part of that scale. Or we become Cain and we kill our brother, the emotion part, or we get killed by it, right? You're either Cain or you're Abel, unless you're both of them. And you can only pretend to be both of them if you imagine the versions of them that work together rather than the versions of these ones that hate each other. So let's go down. Now there's a curse, and you're driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield crops for you. You'll be a restless wanderer on the earth. So that's what it means when logic kills emotion. You're going to be restless. You work the ground, but it no longer yields crops for you. That means there's no enjoyment in what you do, because that's the emotion. And even if you are capable of emotion through logic, you're never going to get the conditions right because other people aren't playing by the same rules. They are the ones that decide what to accept and what to reject. And when logic decides this should be accepted and this should be rejected, even though they're not the ones making that decision, they try to dictate the outcome. But they only try to dictate the outcome because they should be deciding what the outcome is. Instead, they're giving the outcome to another person to tell them what it is and then correcting them for getting it wrong. So it's a lack of faith in the self. And logic needs emotion to exist in a strong way, because emotion is the only thing strong enough to hold logic in place. Because you have to remember, new ideas, they have to stand on something. And if you go deep enough, you run out of answers as to what is this standing on. And that's with anything. Anything. You run out of answers. What is at the bottom of this chain of logic? What's the first thing? And that's where the emotion comes in. You have to be able to look at a thing and say, this is true enough that I'm going to act like it's true all the time, and I'm going to see what happens. That is the proper way to think about that. But that takes emotion, that takes conviction, because at the core of it, there's the knowledge that this is made up. It might not have even been made up by you. It might be secondhand made up. In a good world, that would mean that this is the culmination of the hard work and faithful dedication to a particular craft by a coordinated number of skilled individuals taking place over decades or centuries. And then you might have something there. Or you could have this totally backwards way of thinking where it perpetuates the desire that it's better to just kill them all and let God sort them out. And even if that's a metaphorical thing where somebody disagrees with you and you must destroy all knowledge of their existence by blocking them or canceling them or trying to round up other people to say this person is bad, which, by the way, is what Cain does in metaphorically, and that's what happens when he kills his brother. Cain is no longer able to say what is, because logic has to stand on something. So when a group of people try to get together to cancel a person, the thing behind that is everybody else is saying this is true. And because everyone else is saying it's true, I'm allowed to say it's true. But that's like a house of sticks that's leaning on itself with no foundation, because everybody is relying on somebody else to say it's right. And so you have this amorphous blob of people orbiting around this being the right thing, and nobody is willing to be the one at the center of it to say this is right and this is wrong, and I say so, because that requires the integration of the logic and the emotion. Whenever there's a deflection away from that, am I my brother's keeper? That is a rejection of the integration, and so the war happens inside the self, and the result of that is psychologically, cognitively, if you follow the symbolism through the way I tried to explain it. If you kill the part of you that works hard, if the part of you that works hard is resentful of the part of you that feels things, you're going to do everything you can to kill it. And that's a very Jungian shadow type thing where we could just be resentful of parts of ourself and we reject that they are a part of us, And we do it so hard that if somebody even reflects that quality that we don't like in ourselves, we will be disgusted with them for their reflection of that, even though their lives really have nothing to do with ours. So that's the Cain and Abel there. It's that person isn't like me. That person voted for so-and-so. That's my favorite one because it's the most asinine division of the world that I've seen. And the only reason I say it's asinine is not because either side isn't making very logical points. It's that both sides have decided that 50% of the people in the world can go fuck off. Not good enough. It's a road to disaster. And if you don't believe me, turn on the television. I'll be happy to tell you how much of a disaster it is. And the only thing they're focused on is whose fault it is. So that's my money lender temple moment, I guess. I don't like it. It's Cain and Abel to the core. Because look at what happens. The ground will no longer yield crops. Emotion needs logic to build things that last. Logic needs emotion to sustain itself and to give it direction. Without direction, you are a restless wanderer on the earth, and the ground will no longer yield its crops. So your ideas won't bear fruit because nobody will care, because you want to be given what's fair before you offer what is your best. So maybe that sounds like a good way to make the transaction fair, but from a marketing standpoint and a business standpoint, it's a terrible strategy, right? Like if you want to be treated as a good individual, then you would really better be great if your first impression is a severely diminished version of that is waiting for preemptive reciprocity. You got to be so good that even when you tone it down 1,000%, people still think you're doing great for them. That's the way you win by accident. Most people don't get to win by accident. Like very few people get to win by accident. And if you do, you might be missing lessons that could come back to bite you. So success in one area is not success in another area. There's a lot of unhappy rich people. And there's a lot of unhappy poor people. And there's a lot of unhappy people who were rich that are now poor. And there's a lot of, maybe a few, poor people who are now rich who are also just equally unhappy, if possibly not worse. So it's not the money. Money helps with the modern conveniences, but after a certain point, you've got your television subscription and your Hulu and your phone and your climate control box and a job and a purpose. And then hopefully that's enough to make a stable box where other people want to come and live with you inside that box and care about you and love you. And maybe you won't die of a nail scratch, a lingering death of, I don't know, tetanus or whatever. Like, kings never had it so good. And I can say that because there's no kings right now. But the point isn't that we have more, right? Because we can always have more. In 100 years, there's going to be stuff that doesn't exist yet. So, of course, there's more, right? There's always going to be more as long as people are making things. So it can't be about who's got more. But look at the happiness. You got just as many miserable people with all the modern conveniences as you did back when people just worked the land. So the circumstances change. You hear a lot of talk about circumstances, and it can be difficult if you grow up in bad circumstances. And people who watch this show know that my mom killed herself. Before she did, she did a lot of things that did a lot of damage to a lot of people, and the work of repairing that took a long time. So to say that I've been there. And I learned things the hard way. And I used to be very resentful that I had to learn those lessons that way. Mostly because after I learned them, I realized I didn't have to learn them the hard way if I wasn't so damn closed-minded about some things that kind of really made a lot of eye-opening sense once I took a good look at them, right? I was Cain. I wanted to do good. I had it all mapped out. I didn't understand how to transfer hard work into acceptance because I was so focused on the hard work that I devalued the emotions of everybody that I wanted to like me. I resented it because I wasn't it. I didn't understand it. But it took a lot to understand what all those emotions mean and where they come from and what people mean when they're saying certain things. And that was always very confusing to me. And yeah, I was a restless wanderer, and I had all these great things I did. And it was always enough to keep me going. I never let myself down in a really bad way, like where I never was responsible for the destruction of my life with my choices. But at the same time, I could never do anything more than break even. I always got in as much as I put out. And sometimes it felt like I was losing a little bit. And if you go into the science side of it, the entropy, that kind of makes sense because logic does not correct for empathy when logic is not being fair. And logic can't be fair when emotion isn't a part of the deal because you have to be able to tell if you're being fair by how it makes you feel. So that's kind of how that thing becomes self-defeating. So you put in a sacrifice for the future and you do what's fair. If I do this, I'll get that. Yeah, you should. But did you correct for entropy? Did you correct for the fact that everything in the universe tends towards an increasing state of disorder? Did you correct for the fact that things break down and it's nobody's fault? Did you correct for the fact that your cause and your effect are not lined up in the manner that you decided they should be? Like, has the reality of cause and effect become so far removed from the equation that what reality should be is the only thing that's considered in the face of what reality actually is? That is a punishment that's more than anyone can bear because you will think you're doing everything right. And you might even be balancing the scales in a perfect world. But if you're balancing in the scales and your target is a perfect world, then entropy is going to unbalance those scales every time. And the desire for things to work a certain way is no match for entropy of the universe. They don't stack up. They don't. One of them's a lot weaker. It's just how it is. So that's where the resentment comes in. I shouldn't have to do this extra work. It's not extra. It's the work. You missed the mark on what extra means. Or what enough means, right? That's where the sin is. That's the miss the mark. It's the literal translation. It's an archery thing. The mark is missed when you assume that what you get in is what you should get out. That's the curse of Cain. But look what happens when that feeds in on itself. So Cain, verse 13, Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land. I'll be hidden from your presence. Whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. And Cain went out of the Lord's presence. They had a kid, they had a city, etc., etc. So I want to talk about the avenging part. So first of all, if logic kills emotion, you can't find God, because God is the love and desire for all that is good for things that are living. God is the representation of the sentiment that 100% of people deserve to have solutions when their participation is required for that solution to work. God is the union of male and female. God is the union of logic and emotion, where logic and emotion have gotten to know each other so well that they figured out how they both want the same thing, and they figured out the way to do it that is not destructive to either of them. Because Abel, look at this. This is the next part. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. So this is the part where now it talks about, what if logic kills emotion? Or what if, that's what we just talked about. What if emotion kills logic? What if Abel kills Cain? Or what if someone who wants revenge comes in and does it? Well, the vengeance is 7 times over. Because without logic, there's nothing to keep emotions in check. It's all body. Your body and your subconscious. Without logic, you don't stand a chance. You'd be a murderous troll. Or a sniveling coward. Or probably both. In the right circumstances. That's the vengeance. With a rejection of logic comes a rejection of the ability to regulate emotion at all. And it's so backwards, because think about it. People are literally announcing it to themselves what is wrong when they say it. They're using logic to make an emotional argument. So-and-so made me angry. That's an argument. There's a cause. There's an effect. That person did this specific thing in this exact way, and the result is I got angry. That's logic. But that's when emotion is in charge of logic. It doesn't know what to do with it. Because let me give a little speech, and you tell me when I diverted from what normally would happen. Man, that person just made me so angry that I got up right in his face and asked him to explain himself so that I understood how he wasn't a bad person for saying things the way he did, and how he was trying to do the best thing, even though he did it terribly. No, that's not how that ends, right? That's not how that goes. You know, when someone made you so angry, that's not when you usually transition to the story of how you were the bigger person and reconciled. Unless that's your goal and you were proud of yourself for doing that, in which case, great job, because that is pleasing to the Lord. So that is the point, is without the logic to balance the emotion, the vengeance on the self is 7 times greater than if logic kills emotion. Logic can survive without emotion. That's the other part here. That's the part of the parable. Logic can continue. Logic can build things. It builds cities. Logic can reproduce its ideas. Emotion, if it's not checked, logic, it'll just run supreme. And it will destroy itself. That's why Abel is the one that dies. And Cain is the one that lives. So if Cain is avenged 77 times, then Lamech 77 times. And that's this, you've got like the spiraling cycle of how logic can use logic to make itself feel worse and worse and worse. Because that's the other part. Logic tries to use logic to justify its departure from, logic uses emotion to justify its departure from emotion. Now, logic is the part that can make plans for the future. Logic is the part that can go and work a job that it hates because it understands the value of a paycheck and the stability that provides, etc., etc. Emotion just destroys itself if it doesn't have any logic, because that's what sane people look like. If there's no logic, that's not a good thing. So that's the story of Cain and Abel. The story of Cain and Abel is the enmity between our own logic and our own emotion. And this is not a cautionary tale so much as it is a roadmap of early psychological development. We all go through this. Okay, some of us get it at different times. But it's tough to find a person who hasn't had to go through a period of resentment before they found out who they were, or some sort of emotional struggles of how other people were hurting them in certain ways. And just because we're born there, number one, doesn't mean we all stay there the same amount of time. And it doesn't mean that we ever have to leave. That's the point of this story. Abel dies. He's gone. And Cain, he makes a city and has another kid, and then he's out of the story. So that's kind of how that works there. And then look at the end. Why add this? Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son named Seth, saying, God granted me another child in place of Abel because Cain killed him. Seth had a son named Enosh, and at that time people began calling him the Lord. So, going back to the original analogy of emotion and logic, Adam and Eve put themselves together and had an idea, and it gave birth to it. And the one idea was ruled strictly emotion, and the one idea was strictly logic. And both of them got parts of it right, and both of them were disasters. Abel was murdered because he made his brother so angry. Think about that, too. Made his brother so angry that he killed him. And Cain, pretty much, he went off into the sunset with this curse from God. So, if Adam and Eve are the perfect union, representative of the male and female parts of our consciousness, or the logical and emotional sides of our consciousness, or the order and chaos of our consciousness, and they had these two ideas, let's be all emotion, let's be all logic, and both of them ended terribly. Well, what happens in that case? Both of the ideas spun out. They weren't stable. They weren't self-sustaining. They died. They were written off as irrelevant. They have another one. Adam made love to his wife again. Logic and emotion comes together again. The male and female come together. Logic and order come together. Chaos and structure come together. Granted me another kid. So what happens? It just repeats. Okay, that didn't work. We're going to try again. That's my view of the psychological significance of Cain and Abel, the amygdala, and the evolution of consciousness. More or less, the summary is we are part logic and we are part emotion, and that's a balance that takes place in all of us. If we obey the command of God in the Bible, which is summed up as love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. The love your neighbor as yourself part is easy, and we went over why at least I'm acting like I think the command to love God is to put the desire and the will behind that which is good for every person as best as you are able at all times. Then neither one of these children did that. And Abel did not do that, and Cain did not do that. And neither one of them was successful at building themselves into a thing which could sustain itself. So, take that for what it's worth. I hope you enjoyed this episode of what I think the Bible means. Next time, I think I will be getting to Noah. Yes. So we're going to go over Noah. Not going to spend a lot of time on Noah, but it should be fun. At least one episode. Thanks for watching. And I don't know, come back. Hope to see you again.